Hi, it's Lynne with Soft Squares. You see this bag? It is empty right now, but it was full of leftover pieces from when I went to the long-arm quilter, and this is just from round 2. So I'm going to show you what I did with it. Today I'm going to show you what I do with my batting and my fabric that's left over after my quilts come back from the long armor. So I have just gone through and cut a whole bunch of pieces of fabric up, and I'll show you what I just went through. But I've done 5 so far, and here are 2 small ones, and I wanted to show you what I'm doing. So what they do when you take your quilt to the long armor, you have to give them extra fabric on the back because of how it goes on the machine. And I'll show you a couple clips of what the machines look like when they're running, so you can see why that's necessary. Here's this one. We're putting little foxes and bears. It's really hard to see, but on the back side it's going to be so cute. When they're done, they will trim the quilt down for me. It is an option. Just depends on what your long armor does. I have an option to take it back from them and trim it myself, or to let them trim it, and they have bigger surface, and I just let them do it. But because I want my fabric back and I'm giving them my own batting because I do so many quilts, I want my scraps of batting back too, because I can use these on smaller projects, and I can even piece them together if I need to for something a little bit bigger. Not for a really big project, obviously, but these are big pieces of batting and big pieces of fabric. So I'm going to show you how I salvage this so I can use it. Let's see here. This one's not going to be the easiest to see on. Well, look at this. This one doesn't have hardly any on it, so they were able to trim right up next to it. Well, that one's done. Oh, I don't bother to keep this. This is just not worth keeping. But then I take this and I fold it up. It does still have the selvage on it. I'm not too worried about that. I could cut it off right now, but I'm going to put it in my scrap bin for pieces of fabric that are, I'm going to measure the most narrow part of the strip before the selvage. So this is 2 inches of usable fabric. Does that make sense? So this will go in my 2-inch bin, even though I've got some pieces that are a little bit bigger, but that's how I keep my stuff. And I try to put the edge when I fold it inside just to keep it easier. Okay, so there's that one. Here's some more from that quilt. I don't think there's anything on here worth saving. Now, when they do the quilting, the reason it goes off to the side is because they're using automatic programs, and they tell the machine what size the quilt is, and then it adjusts for that area. And sometimes, because it's in the middle of a pattern, it needs to go bigger than the edge of the quilt. So that's why, another reason why they need more fabric. Then the quilting will go off the edge, but when they square it up, you don't notice. But you end up with pieces like this. Now this right here could all go in my scraps. It'd be a lot of work to keep it, but there is at least an inch there, and I will save fabric as small as an inch. Okay, onto this piece. So we have the, oh, they did a good job at getting thread that matches my quilt, so it's really hard to see because it's light thread. But the quilting goes into the batting that was cut off, the excess batting. So I'm going to, I could do it freehand or with scissors, or sometimes I'll get my ruler if there's a lot to do. In this case, I am going to use my ruler, or my, yeah. And what I need is to get it so it's not attached anymore, so I can separate the batting from the quilting. Now, I don't want to cut in that far all the way down the length of the fabric, because that's a lot of fabric I would be missing out on. So I will, excuse me, I will dip in like this if I need to, because I don't know how this fabric's going to get used next time I use it. It might be that I just need a chunk of it. It might be that I need something that's this wide, and it wouldn't work with the narrowness of that. So I just try to make it as usable as possible, because there's a lot of fabric here, a lot that can be done with this. See, and I don't need that gone. This is kind of weird how this came out. You could definitely tell it's part of the pattern. It's like every 6 to 8 inches. Oops. Usually I'll cut right through the batting, but this is making it so I can see easier because the thread is so close in color. Now, if I want to take time, I could square these up, but again, I don't know how I'm going to use it. Sometimes these end up in applique, sometimes they end up in a block, they might end up in a border or a scrappy quilt. I don't really know. So I'm trying to give myself as much as I can. Now, I'm not going to worry about keeping this piece of batting. I could cut it off and bring it down to here, because these are where it's too narrow. And maybe I'll do that. I think I'll keep this one, except I've got the stitching on it. I'm not going to worry about this. Too much of a bother for how little the piece will be. I know that looks funny, but we're going to live with it until I know how I'm going to use it. Now I fold it up as pretty as I can, put it in the bin, and I have my scrap bins labeled 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, and above are the way my bins are labeled. So this one is going to be in the 3.5 plus bin, because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looks like it's a minimum of 5. Could be up to 7, but it's over the 3. So all I care is that it's at least 3 inches and it's going in that bin. Here's my scrap bins that I save things in. They need to be relabeled. They've been around forever, but this is my 1-inch strip, 1.5. 2 came off of that one, but 2.5. The 3 came off of that one, and 3.5 and a plus. They're in order, sitting right there. And then I have on top is where I'm going to put the leftover pieces that are big. This is also a scrap bin of just large scraps, but this is where I try to keep my strips, and that's where I'm going to be putting these from today. So what you're seeing here when you see these little pieces, this is what was left over after they trimmed it from the front. So sometimes you don't see that, sometimes you barely see it, sometimes your quilt is crooked and you see a lot more of it. Okay, now I wish I had, I did make some footage without me talking of me doing this on darker fabric. I don't have anything to narrate, but I will show you that, where you can see how I was able to see what was going on and cut into it. Here they're stitching only from here to here, so I'm just going to cut around it. Same here. It's really easier to go over the batting than it is to do what I did a minute ago. All right, now I don't think this is worth keeping. It's on the edge, but it's just not enough to matter. I have enough batting pieces. I'm not scrimping and scraping to get every little piece, but those could be saved. Okay, again, this is going my 3.5 Plus bin. Now we're gonna come back over here where it's a little harder to see. So they have like a taupe colored quilting on the yellow line work on the hair. So there's really light on light. Maybe you can see it better on the back. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna put my ruler on here and I'm gonna try to cover every place that it sticks out and just do a straight line. Because the pattern repeats, it should be really close all the way up. So we got to here, but then it goes back. So that's easiest to take it off there. Now this is worth saving. I will save it, fold it up, put it in with my scraps. Again, this is really good for quilt as you go stuff or a small craft project. Why cut into the bigger pieces? So this one, usable space after the selvage, 1, 2, 3, 3 1/4, 3 1/2. I'm gonna put my 3 1/2 in because when I go to cut it down, I might actually be able to get 3 1/2. This one, there's not a lot after the quilting to keep. You can still do it just to have it and see, because it could work in something scrappy. I find it easier, well, it just depends, but sometimes easier to cut on the back side because you can see the indentation from the quilting. Easier than you can see the thread when it's so close in color. It really doesn't matter. That's why you'll see me change it around. Just depends. Okay, so this is less than 1 inch. I'm just gonna cut this about there. Try to get off little pieces of batting that may still be there. So there's a little bit of stitching that's still there. It's not worth taking a divot into the fabric. In fact, I'll probably leave it on there until I go to use it, because I might trim it off later, but I also might need it and I'll take the time to pick it out of the seam. So I'm not always getting everything out, but I'm getting it pretty ready to be used. Okay, so I got a couple of these here and there. So this is going to go in my 1 inch bin. In case you're wondering what these quilt backs were used on, I have a recent video on my completed quilts for 2022, and it's video number 1. No, video number 2. Sorry, these are the backs for video number 2. Then you can see what the whole thing looks like. Okay, this is actually kind of cool because this is a wide strip of quilted fabric. So depending on what you want to do, I wouldn't keep this part, but you may be interested in keeping this to do quilt as you go or something, you know, just depends on what you want. if you feel like leaving it. I'm not going to. This batting is narrow, but I'm going to keep it. Did you see how I just cut this off right here? Because why go straight across that and waste all that fabric when it could be used? And then you just go slowly through here because there might be places where it's hooked. And I really don't think I'm going to keep this. I will keep this. And I think this is going to go in my 1 inch bin as well because it's really not bigger. Oh, it's 1.5 inches. I'm going to put it in with the 1 inch because then if I go to pull this one out, I'll see that there's more of it and maybe incorporate it that way. Now there's another thing I can do here. Actually, I'm going to do it right now. I'm just going to cut this piece off. Then I have a little bin right here by me when I'm standing, and I just throw in chunkier pieces in here. And that might come in handy there, but as far as the strips, I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so I'm going to put both of those in my 1 inch strip bin, and that's why. So I'm going to show you all the fabric I just saved by not having it cut off and thrown away. Now, obviously I've got some big pieces in here. So these right here, very easily, very normally, they will cut it off and keep it or toss it. There's a good sized piece right there. But I think this is usable. I'm into scraps. I want them all. So I have all of these. But when you take your fabric in, I like to give them more fabric than they need if it's possible. Sometimes I'm just barely scraping by to get enough fabric to do the back. But if I can, I'll give them extra, which is why you're seeing pieces this big, or even this big. This is the width of what they had left over. And same with this one, and same with the blue one. I would rather cut it off and get as big of a scrap as I can than cut it down, risk the chance of being short on having enough fabric to quilt with, and then end up with a small scrap like this when I'm trimming it, as well as the piece I trimmed off. If that made any sense at all, it just means I get a bigger scrap and it's playing it safe. So these are big. In fact, these are like the length of the quilt because these are really, really big pieces. This is probably my smallest of these. In addition to cutting off and getting this usable fabric and getting the usable pieces of batting and putting them to the side, some of them were pretty good size. I have these. These are where it was a large piece that was quilted, but it's a good size. This could be used somehow. And maybe you quilt as you go people or anyone out there have an idea on how to use these. I'm sure it'd be scrappy, but these are all quilted pieces. There was no quilted back, obviously, but they're pretty wide. And it's really the length of the strip right here, so they weren't going all different jaggedness. Anyway, so this is what I do. I keep these in hopes that maybe I can turn it into something scrappy. I do make hot pads. This might be a good thing for the hot pads because you still have to quilt and put the insole right on there in the back fabric, but it's small enough that it doesn't need a lot of quilting. That might work. But anyway, let me know what you think I should do with these and what you have done if you've ever ended up with these. Here are some other fabrics that I have saved that were a nice wide strip of quilted. Now this one actually ends up being the front and the back, which is a really strange story behind that one. But the rest of these are just quilted on the front. But it's a big piece with the batting in there. So these are just other quilts. All of my quilts have either been sold, gifted, or are listed on my Etsy shop. So a lot of these you may be able to see what the finished project was. If I don't have a video on it, it for sure is in my Etsy shop. But just seems like I can use these somehow. So I'm holding on to them, keeping them all in one spot. This is where I had to trim a quilt down, make it a little shorter. This is where I was keeping my leftover pieces of batting, but I really have got the big pieces. They need to go in a better place. But see, most of these are the from trimming off the quilts. I do have a bin where I keep bigger pieces. I use them for applique, so they're over by my embroidery machine. But these, I need a bigger bin. But these are just little scrappy things. And when I can, if I'm using batting on something, if it's something small, I will go to these, and I'd rather stitch them together and make them a little bit bigger if needed than cut into a big piece like this. fact, I'm going to put this over by my embroidery machine right now. Here's another bin I have of small pieces of fabric, and I do use these for a lot of things, but they're great for scrap quilts and hot pads. So a lot of the fabric that I cut from here, even though they're going in their bins, if it's a short piece, I might put it in here. I'll show you what I mean by short. Like this one. This is big enough it can go in the bag with whatever size is that size. So I have them labeled. Let me get that out of there. So this is what I do. These are ones that have been tossed in lately that haven't been organized, and I'm not going to worry about that right now. So I'll put this in with this to organize. It's just a little bit of an organization to my scraps, but it gets involved in this project when I'm trimming down the quilts. And this is one of the pieces of the leftover backing that had been quilted, and I was practicing a binding on here for a video, and I just put a piece of fabric from my stash on the back side and then put a little thing around it, so it's nothing other than just to show a border. I can probably throw it away or cut down into it. There's still fabric. So that's how I deal with my fabric when it comes back from the quilter. And I'm going to put all these in my bins where they belong. Now these ones right here, I have a special scrap bin for fabric that's not at least a yard wide. And this is definitely not, it's the width of fabric for sure, but it's only like, you know, 12, 14 inches. This will go in a special place where I have other fabric about the same. But I'm done with these. So go check out that other video. I'll put it at the end of this one so you can go right to it. But if you have any questions, let me know. And if you have a way that you do, or a system you have with your quilter, let me know. And a lot of you are quilters, so tell me what you do when you get other people's quilts, or, you know, just interested to see. I know this is just what I do. No one taught me this. I'm probably not the only one like this, but maybe I am. Guys, well, that is it for this. Please like, subscribe, share, and hit the bell. Please subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Have a great day.